Hey there. Hi guys. Thanks so much for having me, and big shout out to the LNUG organizers, first of all, for organizing this in these strange times. Um, I'm Thomas. I am 23. I'm Dutch. I started my first startup when I was 15, which was an e-learning platform that I sold to my own high school. Since then, I've created some other companies, the most recent one being NearSt, a company that helps local shops to show their livestock on Google, so that you can just Google a shop name and see if the corner store around the corner still stocks toilet paper or some better use of that technology. Um, let's go to the slides if you don't mind, Kevin. So what I'm going to talk about is transactional emails and how to manage those and scale them up, which might sound boring because out of experience, I think that building systems that involve sending email aren't the most interesting. But hopefully I can give you some guidelines on how to make it a little less boring and give some tools that should really help develop email systems next time you have to. So first off, I guess let's quickly discuss what transactional emails entail. I guess all of you know, but let's do it anyways. So transactional emails are any type of emails that are sent automatically. So for example, whenever you try to get a new password, the reset link will send you an email, or a monthly invoice, or a welcome email for some platform that you just signed up for, or a notification of some new content on a social network platform. And these are usually HTML emails. And HTML is not the nicest for emails. Let's, for example, go to this MailChimp one for a second. Source code for that looks like this, which probably doesn't really spark joy. It turns out it's actually really hard to make emails look great across all the different email clients that exist, especially the slightly older ones like Outlook. A lot of those email clients don't support a lot of the standards we're used to when writing HTML and CSS for the modern web. One of the most obvious things is these emails still use tables to do simple layouts like centering the content in the middle of the email, which is something we've not done on the web since like 2008. And if you would put in a pull request on GitHub with code like this, you can probably expect some rude comments from senior developers because it's just not acceptable. Unfortunately, for email, it's the only way to go. One of the other things you might notice in this snippet is that almost every element has a style attribute. Unfortunately, a lot of email clients don't support separate style sheets, so you need to have them in line. And in general, all of this is not really manageable. You don't want to have code like this in your repository. It just doesn't look great, and it's really hard to maintain because finding some kind of sentence that you want to edit in here is just a nightmare. Luckily, there's a few solutions for that. One of my favorite ones being MJML, which is a standard developed by Mailjet, a email sending provider. It's a open source tool set that kind of provides you a HTML-like syntax and a whole lot of standard components to quickly build your emails. It looks something like this. That's already a lot more manageable. You'll notice all these MJ dash components. And it's pretty simple to get started with this. They have a really cool website that has a getting started course, some free templates, and it also has an online editor with a live preview function so that you can build your emails and see what they look like. You can even still use some of your own HTML and CSS in here if you want to, but you luckily almost never have to because their standard component set is quite extensive. So this is a big step ahead from just plain HTML templates. But it still requires a developer to look at it. It's not something that you could pawn off to your partnerships or marketing team and ask them to make a simple change. So what I've started doing in some of my projects recently is splitting out email templates into two parts. One being the layout file, the general structure of the email with some styling, probably your logo on the top and some standard links at the bottom. And then keeping the actual email content separate in a markdown file. You probably are all familiar with Markdown. It's what we use to write our READMEs on GitHub. What's slightly different about these Markdown templates is that there's two specific technologies used, namely the addition of front matter, the red stuff at the top, and a templating language called Twig to add variables. That front meta at the top allows us to set some standard metadata about the email. So in this example, it defines that the standard or the default layout MGML file should be used, and what the subject is and what the inbox preview is. And then you'll see that there's these merge tags in Twig. Twig is kind of like handlebars or mustache. So it allows you to really easily embed dynamic content in your email and even do things like if and else statements if you need to conditionally show some content. Recently, I've built a pipeline around these few technologies quite often for startups. And recently I got kind of fed up with that and realized I should just build an open source tooling library that encompasses all of these. So what I've built is a library called Magog that does a few things. Namely, it contains a Node.js library to parse these templates with the separate layout and content files and simply send them. It also contains an in-browser preview tool that will show you what emails look like while you're editing them, and a command line utility that helps you set up your project with these email templates. So to get started with that, you simply run npx macaw init. npx is the executable tool from npm. It will just download the package and immediately run it. So if you run this in your project, it will create an email directory, it will add some templates, and it will add macaw as a dependency to your package.json file. And what you're left with is a structure like this. An emails directory with some plain text markdown files in there, and then the subdirectory with your layout files. What's cool is that you can then just run macaw preview, and it will open your web browser with a preview of your email templates that you can edit while seeing what they look like. So this is what that tool looks like. You can choose your template, choose between a few different preview modes to see what your email will look like on mobile, and set some vars that the template needs to be filled out. The next part is, I mentioned that Macaw also allows you to send email through different types of providers. And the code that you need for that is actually pretty short. You simply require or import Macaw and then one of the providers that it comes along with. So for example, SendGrid is my preferred email sending provider usually. You simply create an instance of Macaw and then set that provider. You can optionally set a different directory if you don't want to go with the standard structure of having an emails directory in your root. Then you load in the template, monthly newsletter in this case, and specify some vars. And then you simply call the send method on the template, and it will use the provider you specify to send it off. There's a lot of optional parameters, but the only thing that's required is a to address. Like I mentioned, it's possible to switch out SendGrid for another provider. Currently, I only support SendGrid and Amazon's simple email service, but it should be easy enough to build your own adapter for your preferred email provider. So what I thought might be fun is to talk about how we use this in production at NearSt. Short answer is that we currently don't, because we use a very old and way less structured version of it. But hopefully we can switch to actually using Magog pretty soon. NearSt is built completely using serverless technologies. And the email service is a perfect example of splitting things up into separate functions, because the email service is just one Lambda that accepts a few parameters, namely the user ID, a template name, and then some vars, and it sends out the emails. In our use case, we basically only ever send emails to users that we already know. So instead of passing along a email address, it's easier to just pass along a user ID. And then that function retrieves that user's data from the database, most importantly, name and email. But in our case, users are shops. So we also retrieve the shop name and things like the address, so that they're available as standard vars to be used in templates. And then something else we do is we log whenever we send an email to a user. Most providers already do that out of the box. For example, SendGrid has a great dashboard where you can see the history of the emails you've sent. But storing it ourselves allows us to show a full history of the communication we've had with a specific user without having to query SendGrid for that. And it allows us to do something else that I think is pretty fun, that I custom built for NearSt, which is forcing some emails to only be sent once. For example, a welcome to the platform email should never be sent more than once during the lifetime of a customer. So for those, I've added something in the Markdown where you can specify that it's one of those emails by just simply setting the parameter once to true in the Markdown formatter. And if the Lambda sees such a template, it'll first check in the database if we've not already sent that email to the user. And if we have, we'll output an error instead of sending the email. To kind of talk slightly about the world of serverless that Bernard was just talking about, we trigger those emails mainly based on DynamoDB event streams. So for example, when a shop ends their trial on the platform, the only thing the front end does is it does a call to update a row in DynamoDB, setting a trial end date. And then DynamoDB automatically triggers a Lambda that notices that that shop before didn't have a trial end date and now does. So it can send an email to the shop to tell them that their trial has ended. We do something similar with SNS topics. We have a data lake, or rather a data puddle, I guess. We're just getting started. That stores a lot of different events. And instead of having to include the business logic of sending of notification based on some of those events, on the application side, we can simply just create a new Lambda, hook that Lambda up to an SNS topic, subscribe to it, and then based on the event type, send out a certain email. The cool thing about this is that it makes it very scalable if we ever decide to add new notification types or maybe even new ways of sending notifications. If we, for example, would want to start sending push notifications to users, that would probably just be a separate Lambda that listens to the same SNS topic or DynamoDB stream. Some small practical tips around scaling up your transactional emails. As soon as you start sending thousands, there's a few things you should take into account. One of them I already mentioned, which is make sure that you log your emails somewhere. In our case, that means that our partnerships team can easily see in a dashboard for each individual shop what emails they've received and when we were last in touch with them. What might be helpful as well at some point is starting to use a custom IP. When you usually send emails through Amazon's simple email service or through SendGrid, you'll share an IP address with a lot of other SendGrid customers. The disadvantage of that is that those customers could be sending spam, and ISPs usually blacklist email servers based on IP address. So your emails might not end up with your customers because someone else on the platform is doing something malicious. A way of getting around that is purchasing a custom IP. That's pretty cheap nowadays. Both SendGrid and Amazon SES offer it for less than $25 a month. And then you're completely in control because the only emails sent from that IP address will be your own. One thing to keep in mind with that is that you need to warm your IP address, which means ISPs will get really suspicious if they suddenly see a new IP address starting to send thousands of emails a day, even though they didn't previously know about the email address. So slowly ramping up the number of emails you send might be a good thing. Both SendGrid and Amazon SES have tools to aid you in that. And if you have a custom IP address, you should also really keep an eye on your delivery and spam stats. Because if you're being flagged as spam, it's way easier for an ISP to block your specific IP, and more customers will be impacted by that. My last tip is MGML is a pretty good way of getting around most of the differences between email clients, but it doesn't always produce 100% the same result for every email client. So if you want to be really sure, I would recommend using a tool like Litmus, which is kind of what Litmus is kind of for email what Browser Stack is for web pages, which means you simply insert some HTML in litmus.com and they will send you back screenshots of how that email looks in hundreds of different email clients on different devices. So that's a really helpful tool. I'll just leave it with asking you to, if you have a project coming up where you have to send a lot of emails, maybe check out my library, and I'd love to see what you think and how we can improve it. I think that's it. Thank you, guys.